Welcome back. We are here with our pfSense running, and we also have our Windows Server 2012 running. The next thing we want to do right now is actually setting up some firewall rules so that we can separate what happens on the LAN side, what happens on the DMZ side, so that they don't interact with each other in a negative extent. So what you want to do is you want to go to Firewall here and you want to go to Rules. And once you're here, this entails the WAN, all the firewall rules for the WAN. Now, usually you can just leave the WAN because the WAN, you want it to be there so that you can access your actual router, your actual home router, so that you can have access to the internet. What you want to do is you want to edit the LAN and the DMZ also. Over here, you want to just add it. And for the LAN here, it automatically has a anti-lockout rule. What this does is that in the event that you mess up something here where you block yourself out from accessing this actual GUI interface, so if you try to type in 192.168.1.1, you might be blocked out because of a firewall rule that you set here accidentally. This is meant for protecting you from being locked out. So my recommendation is to leave this here. For these two, we'll delete it for now because we want to set our own rules. So in order to delete this, you have to click this trash can button right here. And after you delete both rules, you want to make sure that you apply changes. Like I said, this is very important for the firewall rule configurations to update. Once that is done, you can go to DMZ, and by default, DMZ does not have any rules. Also, by default, the firewall, it blocks everything. So if you don't have any rules here, it will blacklist everything until you whitelist all the ones that are safe. So for this rule, it whitelists HTTPS and HTTP. So now let's start adding some firewall rules. Now, some of the firewall rules that you want to set are usually related to services in which you want to use. For me, I personally use ICMP, which is for pinging. I also use SSH for FileZilla client, in which I can transfer files over to the web server. I also use DNS so that I can actually type in the domain name of certain websites rather than accessing those websites using the actual IP addresses. So if you want to use google.com instead of its actual IP address, you have to enable DNS. And finally, HTTP and HTTPS going outwards. And all 5 rules I enabled through the LAN interface. So let's go ahead and do that. What you want to do right now is click add. This basically adds it to the top of the list, whereas this adds it to the end of the list. So I'll add it to the end of the list. All right, action pass. This means that this rule will enable the rule to pass rather than block it. And you want the interface to be under LAN. Now the first firewall rule that we want to enable is ICMP. So the protocol is going to be ICMP, which is used for pinging. For source, we want it to come from the LAN net. LAN net, it means basically all the machines connected on the LAN network. So this includes 192.168.1.30.31.32, all those. Anything that ends with 192.168.1. Your number will be considered on the LAN net, whereas the LAN address is only consisting of 192.168.1.1, which is the actual LAN address, the actual LAN IP address that we set. So we want it to be across all the machines under that subnet. That's why we put LAN net. all those machines will be able to ping. Save. And we have here the new firewall rule of which we added. And we will click apply changes. Once that's applied, we want to add the next firewall rule, which is for SSH. We want to pass it again. For the protocol, it's going to be under TCP. And for source, we want it to be LAN net again. For the destination port, this is where we specify the actual port in which we want to enable. In our case, SSH is port 22, and 22 is not here, so we want to do other, and we want to manually put in 22. Once that's done, you can click save. Alright, apply changes. And because the rest of the firewall rules is going to be similar to this, except for the port, we could do a simple shortcut by copying this. Everything is copied except for the port range. Our next one is DNS, which is over here. Click DNS, port 53. Save. Okay, it's added. Apply changes. And we want to copy again. This time it's HTTP, which is port 80. Click save, apply changes, copy one more time. Now it's HTTPS, port 443. This is the hypertext secure protocol. Apply changes. All right, now these are the firewall ports that I believe are usually enabled across generic companies in which they use these services. So next, let's configure the DMZ. Now the DMZ will have one firewall rule that limits it from communicating on the LAN side. But similarly, it will also have services enabled because the DMZ machines will also need to be able to access the internet via HTTP, HTTPS, and the DNS. So let's go ahead and add that. All right, our first rule, let's add ICMP again for pinging. So protocol ICMP, and make sure interface is under DMZ, not LAN. We're editing the DMZ this time. For source, make sure it is DMZ net, not LAN net this time. We're editing the DMZ. So this means all machines on the DMZ side has this firewall rule applied to it. Okay. And everything is done here. Click save. And we can see that the ICMP firewall rule has applied. Well, we have to apply here first. Now it has applied to the DMZ net here. Let's add the next rule, which is under protocol TCP, we want to add the DNS rule. For that, we change the source to LAN net, and the destination port is going to be DNS, port 53. Click save. All right, and apply changes. Now let's do the same thing again. We want to do HTTP and HTTPS, which is basically the same as this one, except you change the port. Click copy, scroll down, and you change this to port 80, HTTP. Click save, apply changes, copy again, scroll down, change it to HTTPS, port 443. Click save and apply changes. Okay, now we have all these firewall rules enabled for the DMZ. Now we don't need SSH because the DMZ won't be using any sort of FTP client in order to transfer to the server, because the DMZ will have the actual server. So now, in order to separate the DMZ from communicating to the LAN side, instead of adding a passing rule, which we had previously done to these four, we want to add a rejection rule. So we want to add it here. And under action here, this is what separates it. We want to reject. So what rejects does is that it will, every time that this firewall rule hits, it will reject that packet and it won't be able to send that packet, so that in the event that the DMZ wants to communicate via, let's say, pinging, the DMZ wants to ping the LAN side, it won't be able to do that because that packet will be dropped. So to do that, for protocol, we want to set this to any. We want to block all traffic that DMZ is trying to communicate to the LAN side. For source, it's going to be DMZ net. Now this is the source, so from DMZ to LAN net. So any DMZ computers that want to communicate to the LAN computers, you want to block it. So click save. All right, looks good. Apply changes, and everything is set.